We now come to the final part of our overview of Proverbs 4 through 9. Item 5, the influential women in Proverbs. And actually at this point, although it's inspired by the prominence with which figurative and literal references to women occur in Proverbs 4 through 9, we're going to extend our gaze beyond chapter 9 as well. Influential women then forms a significant theme within the book of Proverbs. The grandfather's compositions are among the earliest to develop this motif within Proverbs 4 to 9. The father employs it as well in his portion, Proverbs 1 through 3. Finally, influential women resurface in the person of King Lemuel's mother, who is the source of instructions in 31, 1 through 9. And finally, as the concluding subject of the book, Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. Understanding how sages employed female characterization over the course of Proverbs 4 through 9 will be vital for grasping the structure of this section of the book. Two questions emerge in this topic. First, which characters are figurative and which are literal? And second, how did his use of figurative female characters serve the sage's rhetorical objectives? First then, which characters are figurative and which are literal? Some of the female characters are clearly figurative, personifications of abstract concepts. Principal among these are the protagonists, woman wisdom, in the singular, chokhmah, and lady wisdom, representing a plural Hebrew form, chokhmot. The singular is in 7:4 and 8:1, and lady wisdom, the plural form, is in 9:1, as also it was in chapter 1, verse 20. In addition to the protagonist, there is the antagonist, Dame Folly, appearing explicitly and named so in chapter 9, verse 13. Other women are not figurative, but are literal, such as the father's mother, referred to in 6:20, and there's also mention of a mother in 1:8. Also among the literal would be the pupil's wife, since she is identified as his proper source for physical intimacy, chapter 5, 15 to 19. The review that follows of female characters will begin with Proverbs 4 to 9, followed by Proverbs 1 to 3, and ending with Proverbs 31. Consider first then female characters in 4 to 9 of Proverbs. The poet introduces the pupil's wife as the protagonist offsetting the antagonist and seductress, foreign woman. That's in chapter 5, 1 to 14. In his wife, the pupil should find literal and legitimate solution to physical appetites. Corresponding to the wife, the threat of foreign woman also is literal. Protecting the youth from the genuine hazards of actual sexual promiscuity formed the poet's uppermost concern in Proverbs 5, which was entitled, "Avoid the enslaving foreign woman, delight in your wife and find fruitfulness." The situation grows more sophisticated with the next influential women poem, that is poem number 8, starting in 6:20. This time the protagonist woman appears first. Although unnamed, we begin to detect her figurative role by her association with what is called in chapter 6, verse 20, father's commandment and mother's instruction. Further, her benefits consist not of a material sort, as did the wife's in poem 4, but rather of a non-material sort, namely guidance, protection, and conversation. This comes in 6:22. She is woman wisdom, although not yet named so. The antagonist of that same poem, number 8, answers to a sequence of 5 descriptions. First, we learn of her moral propensity, which is evil. Next, her non-Israelite heritage, she is a stranger. Followed by promiscuity, which grows increasingly brazen and hazardous due to her marital bond and her spatial proximity to the youth, for she is in fact his neighbor's wife. Despite the fact that the protagonist woman of poem number 8 is figurative, she is the unnamed woman wisdom, it does not follow that the antagonist woman is figurative as well. The poet makes too great an issue of the threat posed by her offended husband for her to be a metaphoric figure. The youth must learn the literal hazards of adultery. If he will follow her counsel, woman wisdom, on the other hand, can protect him from such allures. As we proceed to poem number 9, woman wisdom gains a name, as does her co-worker, woman insight, 7:5. So the protagonist of poem 9 is figurative. As in poem 8, so in poem 9, the protagonist guards against the antagonist and her slippery speech. And that showed up in chapter 6, verse 24, and chapter 7, verse 5. At last, in this poem, that is number 9, we will hear some of the antagonist's actual speech. What of the antagonist in poem 9? Is she literal or figurative? She resembles the antagonist of poem 8 in 3 respects. She answers to foreign woman and to stranger woman, according to 7:5. She is married, according to 7:19 and 20. On one level, then, she seems quite literal, the apex of the poet's graphic description of the appeal and peril of promiscuity. The grand poem of woman wisdom's credentials presents robust personification, which allows no hint of literal mother or wife. And now we're turning to poem 10, which encompasses Proverbs 8. Here is an advisor without peer, the finest mentor and consultant one could wish for. Consider next poem 11. Personification governs both female characters in poem 11, that is Proverbs 9, with one new development. Now it is not only Lady Wisdom who appears in personified form, a generous and reliable hostess. Her nemesis personified, Dame Folly, plays the deceptive and predatory hostess. She seduces not physically but mentally, noumenally. Since Dame Folly poses a threat in noumenal realms at the close of Proverbs 4-9, the following query emerges. Might not the grandfather likewise have wrapped threats of a noumenal sort in the garb of physical seduction, even from the earliest introduction of female antagonists? Could he not have introduced warnings against material hazard, that is, seduction to literal promiscuity, valuable as those literal warnings were? Could he not have introduced them as an entry point, allowing later segue to warn against the broader hazards of a noumenal sort, that is, succumbing to seduction by the enticements posed by any behavior that promises quick but ill-advised and sometimes illicit gains, including, for example, co-signing for a foreigner's loan in chapter 6. Consider the huntress and her vengeful husband of poem 8. It seems probable that the poet sought to engender a sense of caution against the folly of sexual promiscuity of a literal sort, so that later on he could develop this into a caution against folly of any sort. Thus, for the sage, folly entails any short-term supposed gain which results in long-term pain. Once again, for the sage, folly entails any short-term supposed gain which actually results in long-term pain. Promiscuity serves both as a vivid example of physical folly and also operates as a foil for folly of all sorts. In contrast, wisdom entails short-term pain but long-term gain, resisting foreign seduction, selecting and remaining faithful to a non-foreign wife. This serves both as a tangible example of wisdom and also as a foil for sagacity of all sorts. Next, let's consider the female characters in the first 3 chapters of the book. The father sage in chapter 1, verse 20, through the end of that chapter, introduces personified wisdom by the same title that's found in Proverbs 9, that is, Lady Wisdom. In Proverbs 1, she swiftly offsets the gang's overture that we found in chapter 1, verses 10 and following. She offsets that with an invitation of her own and a warning. She resembles the sage himself, initially inviting all and then warning those who prove to be disinterested. The second woman in Proverbs 1 through 3 is negative. The foreign and stranger woman, Isha Zara and Nochriah of chapter 2, verses 15 through 19. This individual serves as the feminine counterpart to the nefarious male character immediately prior in Proverbs 2. That is the man speaking perversely, Ish Medaber Tachpuchot, who appears in chapter 2, 12 through 15. So together, the foreign and stranger woman and the man speaking perversely form a pair. Within Proverbs 1 through 3, the characterization of foreign woman remains undeveloped, hinting only at broken pledges and deadly destinations. Her characterization expands significantly in the grandfather's teaching, as we have just seen. After a few intervening verses, a third woman then appears, woman wisdom. She makes her appearance in chapter 3, 13 to 18, holding in her hands commodities of great value. And now let's turn our attention to the female characters of Proverbs 31. Are they figurative or are they literal? Toward the close of the book, the concept of woman as trusted source of instruction resurfaces. Similar to the figure in 1:8 and 6:20, again, she is not only instructor, but also mother to the one she advises. Specifically, she is queen mother of King Lemuel, chapter 31, verse 1. In fitting conclusion to the woman as sage motif, the valiant figure that closes chapter 31, that is beginning in 31:10, is woman, she is wise, she is mother, and finally, she is wife. On the metaphoric level, the sage encourages his pupils to realize that although they may so-called graduate from his quasi-course in wise living, never will they outgrow their need of Lady Wisdom's tutelage. The truly wise youth will take on wisdom as his lifelong symbolic spouse. At the same time, it is significant that the sage attributes such industry and sagacity not merely to some wise but distant woman, such as the wise woman of Tekoa, for example, by attributing such prowess to a wife and by putting such strong words of affirmation in the mouth of her husband. Here we refer to chapter 31, verses 29 to 31. In this way, the sage invites his pupils to honor their own wives, not merely as proper satisfaction for physical appetites, as in Proverbs 5, but to regard them as worthy of honor, as women of wisdom in their own right. Consider as a parallel David's gratitude and commendation of wise Abigail, who later became his wife. 1 Samuel 25:32 and following. So with these observations, we have surveyed which characters are figurative and which are literal, and how it is that some of these themes begin as literal and then may morph to a broader and noumenal concept. Now let's consider 5.2. How did his use of figurative female characters serve the poet's purposes? The figurative use of female characters helped to achieve 4 goals for the sage. First, it is difficult to hold an audience's attention when lecturing about abstract entities such as wisdom. Through personification, the sage clothed the abstract with the concrete, giving it personality, prowess, and credentials. He could have achieved this by personifying wisdom as a stately animal, such as a lion. By portraying her instead as a striking, self-assured woman, he likely gained greater engagement from his audience of young men. As chapters progress, the characterization grows noticeably richer. The stakes grow more costly. By thus escalating the conflict between the competing women's overtures over the course of several chapters, the sage was able to achieve a sense of dramatic crescendo, riveting the audience's attention. Second, the technique of clothing the abstract with the concrete, presenting abstract wisdom in the form of lady wisdom. This also helped the sage transmit ethics on tangible and intangible levels. On the tangible level, he employed the literal seductress, the literal angry husband, and literal wife to inoculate the youth against literal promiscuity. On the intangible level, he could employ the seductress to caution against the allure of any illicit short-term gain, contrasted by the lasting benefits of ethical living. Third, by designating the antagonist principally as foreign woman, the sage draws attention to a key aspect of his value system. This woman has not emerged from a known, trusted kinship network. She holds to alternative values, even serving a god of her own. Chapter 2, verse 17. The sage seeks to inoculate the youth against the potentially undermining influence of an unknown heritage, wedded to priorities unlike our own, he might say. After registering the sage's concern regarding foreignness, we are better able to understand this same theme when it appears aside from female characters, such as, for example, in 6:1, the foreigner who is seeking a loan guarantee. Fourth, in a culture where women generally were treated as inferior, by portraying Lady Wisdom as a highly capable woman, the sage inculcated a sense of respect, at least for this figurative woman. On the literal level, by acknowledging mothers as a source of wisdom, the sage again taught respect for women, especially by including a woman's instruction toward the close of the book. Here we refer to King Lemuel's mother's teaching being included in Proverbs 31. In the final poem of Proverbs, literal and figurative seem to overlap in the Valiant Woman poem, chapter 31, 10 and following. This woman's achievements appear larger than life, suggesting that she represents wisdom personified. Nevertheless, in the husband's warm words of praise for his wife, the sage's pupils might have taken up a model for words of affirmation and indebtedness that they in turn could use to commend their own wives. Thus, by figurative reference to influential women, the sage was able to achieve 4 aims. First, he could overcome wisdom's abstractions. Second, he could transmit ethics. Third, he could underscore the credibility assets of kinship. And finally, he could convey honor for women within. And fourth, he could model honor shown toward women within a patriarchal society. This concludes our overview of Proverbs 4 through 9.